everybody. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. I'm very excited about the guest I have here with me to share with all of you. Dr. Stephen Greer is founder of the Disclosure Project, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or CSETI, and the Orion Project and Sirius Technology Advanced Research. He is father of the disclosure movement. He presided over the groundbreaking National Press Club disclosure event back in May of 2001, where he had over 20 military, government, intelligence, and corporate witnesses presenting compelling testimony regarding the existence of extraterrestrial life forms visiting the planet and the reverse engineering of the energy and propulsion systems of these craft. Over 1 billion people heard of the press conference through the original webcast and on other media coverage such as BBC, CNN Worldwide, Voice of America, Chinese media, and other media outlets throughout Latin America. The webcast itself had over 250,000 people waiting online, which was the largest webcast in the history of the National Press Club at that time. He is a lifetime member of Alpha Omega Alpha, the nation's most prestigious medical honor society, and Dr. Greer has now retired as an emergency physician to work with CSETI full-time, as well as the Disclosure Project and the Orion Project. And during part of his career, he was chairman of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Coldwell Memorial Hospital in North Carolina. And he is the author of 4 insightful books, multiple DVDs on the UFO ET subject. He teaches groups throughout the world how to make peaceful contact with extraterrestrial civilizations and continues to research bringing truly alternative energy sources out to the public. He has studied the Sanskrit Vedas extensively and has been teaching mantra meditation for over 30 years. And Dr. Greer recently has been the subject of a historic film that has just been released called Sirius, which premiered on April 22nd. And I just want to let all of you guys know listening that I had the wonderful opportunity to be there in person to witness the event. And I have to say, honestly, that it was one of the most wonderful things I've participated in a rather long time. And personally, it was one of these kind of things where you're there and you're exposed to the energy of the people and the whole excitement of the event, of course. But I have to say that while I was watching the film, I just kept sitting there going, yes, this is actually what really just needed to happen right now. And I just kept getting the affirmation over and over again that this was such an important event and that it was going to be a moment of drastic change for consciousness for everybody, no matter what your level of understanding in all of these topics are. This film itself opens up a rather large question in one's mind that just begs you to really go out and seek answers to just know more. And I think that's just what's so wonderful about this. After I was done watching the movie, I was there in LA for 2 days. I was able to just really connect with some good friends out there. And I brought some friends of mine to the premiere. And it was overall one of the most positive. I was just lit up after watching this. And that's what I hope to share with all of you, having Stephen on the show to talk and to share. And it was really wonderful to see his emotional and personal connection, not only introducing the film itself, but also sharing, his story in the film. So I'm really excited to share him with all of you tonight. And we have a good show ahead of us. And he's going to be talking about some of the things, the technical stuff, yes, and where everything is going. But I'm hoping he'll share a little more from his heart about his personal journey, about where this has all taken him and the whole event on a positive level. So sit back, sit tight. But I just want to let you guys know his website while you're listening, if you'd like to check it out, is SiriusDisclosure.com, SiriusDisclosure.com/evidence. Those links are on my Achieve Radio homepage right here. And I have also purchased a group of guest viewing passes. It's posted on my Facebook page. It's limited to the first 5 people. You can go on there. You can view the film for free. And once the 5 are done, that's it, sold out. And you can find out the information on how to rent the film at the websites. So I just want to get that out of the way, and I'll reiterate that throughout the hour. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on your show again.
So where are we now? I mean, all of this exciting stuff has happened, and you've released this film. I mean, what does this mean for yourself? Where are you with all of this excitement and attention that's happened?
Oh, well, I mean, it's been a really intense year because, contrary to what some people think, this was a crowdfunded film. One thing that I want to point out is that it was the most successful and largest crowd-funded documentary in history, not just in the history of this genre, but in the history of Hollywood or filmmaking, and thousands of people contributed so it could be made. And we basically did a $5 to $6 million production for 1/10 of that. And in 1 year from the moment of launch of the fundraising campaign to it being released, it was literally less than 1 year, in fact. And so it's been a really intense year, but also very gratifying just to see the number of people who understand what this means. And the purpose of the film actually was to raise awareness on the entire subject involving higher states of consciousness and contact, but also what's behind the secrecy around UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence, which has to do, of course, with the science and technology part of it. But it was also done from the moment it was conceived as a means of raising the funds so that we could do a private, non-governmental research and development project to bring these technologies out. Because having dealt with this subject for over 20 years, what I've discovered is that most of the inventors become so paranoid that they don't ever get their technology out. And if they start to move it out, it gets confiscated. The government is not going to allow these technologies out that are going to terminate the oil industry. And the large corporations are so horizontally and vertically integrated into the system, most of them will be forced to back off if they find a discovery like this. So it's going to take we, the people, as it were, to do an open source research and development effort to bring the science and technology out. And I point out to folks that, maybe in the early days in the 40s and 50s, the national security folks were concerned about what people would think if they discovered we weren't alone in the universe. But now, about 2/3 of the public believe that we're not alone in the universe. And the secrecy, is really because of just the momentum of how classified projects operate, but also because the modus operandi, as a famous top-secret document from Canada stated, of how these objects move, what their energy and propulsion systems are, was figured out. And by 1954, October 1954, we knew how these operated. And so for the last 60 years, we've been basically destroying Gaia and impoverishing the majority of humans on this planet. More than half live in poverty. Unnecessarily. And I think this becomes a matter of great urgency. And so the film has really been created for two purposes. One is to raise awareness, and the other is to raise the resources needed to do a proper research and development effort, because we have found that you're not going to do this out of the back of your car. You're going to need to have a properly equipped lab with some really good physicists and scientists there doing it. So that's one of the real intentions, and the net proceeds of what we're doing with this film are going into a fund to do exactly that. And so far, just in the last 4 weeks or so, we've raised about $250,000, which is a good start on the way to $8 million. But we're not there, but we're getting there.
Well, I think it's very exciting, and I contributed financially to the film. And I remember when it first came out, because I'm a member of the local CSETI group here with Maryland. And and I've also attended your expedition in 2010 at Mount Shasta. So I've always been watching, and I've just been, signed up on everything and watching what you guys send through. And I remember when the announcement came through, how excited the local CSETI group was, and when we talked about it, and when we got together to gather, how positive it was and how exciting it was, and how we all just focused our prayer energy really to just make sure we held that space so that this could really manifest. So all of us were working really hard to do that, and setting our intention and focusing our consciousness on the positive aspect of this happening. And when we heard who you were having produce it, it was very exciting for us. And then, of course, we heard the bad news about his father being shot in the shootings at the Sikh temple. And, we were worried about that affecting the project. And I was so proud that he persevered and moved through that and continued on with the project, and how fast this manifested. And I used to write screenplays, and I used to be a writer for Hollywood films and stuff. And one of the things that I know for a fact is that it takes an incredible amount of time to produce these things from that kind of level. So it was really impressive that it got done so quickly, and it was so well done. So we were cheering you on the whole time, and we were waiting, and we were hoping and keeping our fingers crossed, because, a lot of people have great intentions to go out and do this, but they just don't do it. And what I have found, and what I admire about you, Stephen, is that you do it at such an impeccable level, and you're so impeccable with your work and how you go out in the world and you really present it. You don't just do anything, half-assed. It's always pulled together, and it's always done very well, and I just really appreciate that. So when people talk about this project, and now the film's out, and now everybody's kind of, all their feathers are ruffled, and people are critiquing it and going through it, and, just really, I guess, having some expectations with the film itself, and maybe thinking that what was supposed to happen was the actual disclosure event itself, like they would maybe have with the government itself. Have you? I
find that hilarious. Well, let me stop you right there. I was asked recently. I believe I was on the Joe Rogan show, and he asked this. I said, "Look, Joe, here's the truth. Disclosure is being done by us. It's being done by we, the people. It is not going to be done by the President of the United States." And something that's a very chilling story that doesn't quite come out in the film. And a lot of people say, well, the film doesn't go far enough. Other people feel it goes too far. And frankly, I didn't create the film. I was the subject of the film and sort of the concepts, but the filmmaker who knew nothing about the subject was approaching it from someone who knows nothing. So it wasn't made for the aficionados of the UFO subculture. It was made for people who know nothing about the subject, and to sort of open a portal to them. And then if you go to our website, Sirius Disclosure, Sirius like the star system or radio network, SIRIUS, disclosure.com, there's a whole area called Evidence where we're uploading all these top secret military witnesses and all the documents and all the photos and images and all the reports on this little Atacama humanoid that was pronounced to be a deformed human erroneously and prematurely. We'll get into that in a moment. But the fact is, what I've discovered is that we really want it to be something that isn't preaching to the choir, but that introduces the subject to people who are curious and wanting to discover and explore more. And that was the purpose of it. And it's actually had that effect. I mean, the Huffington Post had a very large article about it that had over 4 million readers of the article. In fact, it was the number one story on the Huffington Post for 4 days. And so it's one of these things. For a small crowdfunded documentary, it's had an enormous impact already in the first month. And we're just now beginning to talk to people about having, theatrical showings. I want to mention those are people who are in the greater New York area. It was going to be at the Quad in Greenwich Village on West 13th Street starting Friday the 31st of May for a week. And you can go to quadcinema.com and see what the showtimes are. So if you want to see it on the big screen, there's going to be a whole week run there, and also in Los Angeles in Beverly Hills at the Music Hall 3. And you can go to Laemmle, LAEMMLE.com. It's a strange name, LAEMMLE.com. And you can find out when the showtimes and all that are. And it's going to be a whole week also in Los Angeles from the 31st of May until the 6th of June. So what we're trying to do is introduce it to the public bit by bit. And I think that for most people, they come away from it with the concept that, well, there really is something here. What do we do next? And the disclosure movement is something that is actually being done by the people, because the people in governmental circles, there are those who know and those who don't know. And those who don't know are most of the people we elect and appoint. There are some exceptions. And those who are on the inside are the permanent bureaucracy, the so-called deep state, the national security state, that kind of stays there. And I know that I never forget when I was briefing President Clinton's CIA director about this, and he said at the end of the meeting, it was almost a 3-hour meeting, which he later tried to cover up, but luckily I had the proof that it actually took place. And R. James Woolsey said at the end, I was giving him this white paper that's in my first book, that you can get on our website, but it basically was recommending a certain number of action points for the president and him to do to get this subject out into the public and to get the science and technology out, so we could get off oil and get the whole world turned around toward the direction it should have been on in the last 100 years. And he looked at me, he says, how do we, and this is the CIA director, the sitting CIA director, not a former one, he says, how do we disclose that which we have no access to? Mm. And it was you mean, think about this. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm an emergency doctor. I go up there as a sort of just a service project that I'm doing as a nonprofit to brief a sitting CIA director on this. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and yet he was so emotional about it. I knew that he was not prevaricating. There was no question in my mind that he was speaking the truth, and I later found out that the same had happened to President Clinton when he was making inquiries, and to many of the leaders. And so when people say, oh, when is the government going to do disclosure? I said, well, unfortunately, the government couldn't find its ass in a well-lighted room with both hands, and for the most part, and what we, to be quite blunt, and so what we have to do is say, okay, the folks who do have this information, documents, testimony, information, need to come forward and tell the truth to the public, and then we need to tell it mind to mind, heart to heart, about the fact that we are being visited, that these civilizations are completely non-hostile, that they're waiting for us to become civilized and peaceful, and they're also waiting for us to quit destroying the planet and each other over these ridiculous power struggles that have been going on for thousands of years. So that, the problem is the ball is in our court. And one of the things that I always point out to people, let's not become cosmically codependent. Big government isn't going to fix this. Big corporation isn't, and the ETs aren't going to land on the White House lawn, as Larry King famously asked me years ago, and just make it happen. We have to educate ourselves and actuate this, and that's really the message of the film. And that's something that most people, they kind of don't like that message, because most people want to sit back and just be entertained with shock and drivel. They don't want to say, we're actually the stewards of Earth. We're the children of Earth. We're responsible for the next 500,000 years of conscious evolution and enlightened civilization on this planet. We're responsible for bringing these technologies out. No matter how difficult the headwinds may be, and they are, we're responsible for going out and forming ambassador teams to make contact. And I point out to folks that we now have for Android and iPhones a contact app that you can link to from our website, SeriousDisclosure.com, where for the price of a latte or a deli sandwich, you can download hours and hours of videotape, meditation CDs, mantra instruction courses, the whole techniques. And you don't have to come out with me in the desert, although some people like doing that. But it's there for anyone to have. And we have a great guy who developed that for us a couple years ago. And for the first couple years, it was only for iPhones, and now we have it for Androids also. So if you don't have an iPhone, you can do it also. And it's just become a wonderful thing. We now have thousands of people all over the world who have teams that go out and use these techniques to make contact. And that in and of itself creates this morphogenic field shift, as Rupert Sheldrake talks about, in consciousness, so that it paves the way for a good future to unfold around us. And that's really the purpose of why I left medicine to do this. I left... I often joke that, I'm an emergency physician, and I know an emergency when I see one. And our planet is in a very dire emergency, and we have to have people who are going to be healers and are going to join together to fix these very large problems that are actually eminently fixable. And this is where I'm very optimistic. But it'll only be fixable if we don't look to big government to fix it, or big corporations to fix it, or big whatever. It's the people coming together. And that's how all real change in human history has happened. If you study, it hasn't come from the power centers. It's come from the people gathering together and creating momentum that changes the course of history. And that's really what we need to realize, is we can do that.
Stephen, do you find that you've had an ability all your life to see things that aren't necessarily, real time happening, that you've had an intuitive connection to the other dimensional aspects of what really enhances the true contact experience? And that's the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, do you feel that the reason it's so difficult in the UFO ET subculture to really break through to some people is that the lack of consciousness, the lack of understanding of that world or dimension, kind of holds people back on a level?
Yes, and yes. I mean, if you I sort of have an autobiography that's titled "Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge," and I think it's in 8 or 9 languages now around the world. And also, you can get that at the website serioususdisclosure.com. And in it, I sort of describe when I was 17, I died. I was very sick and had a near-death experience, and I was raised a very devout atheist, and I was taught, you can't measure in a test tube, it doesn't exist, period. So this experience, what I had was, since I didn't have the bias of organized religion, I had an experience of just unity consciousness and cosmic consciousness in this near-death experience. And it really did change my life. And after that, now before that, I had experiences of lucid dreams and intuition and all these sorts of things, but it really increased. And I said, God, I've got to figure out what happened and if I can keep doing this. So I learned Sanskrit and Sanskrit meditation on my 18th birthday, believe it or not. I hate to admit this, 40 years ago, because I'm going to be 58 on June 28th. But so what happened was I realized that this is something you can actually do. And so as I began to practice the meditation techniques, which, by the way, are in this app that people can get for your iPhones and Android, I learned that these interstellar extraterrestrial civilizations, their communication systems are all phasing at, if we can call it that, resonant frequencies that are beyond the speed of light, that cross into these other dimensions of so-called visual thought, astral consciousness, thought energy, because they're not using electromagnetic signals to travel across time. And one of the biggest problems I have found with people who studied the UFO issue is that they confuse the things being made by Lockheed Martin and my uncle's old company, Northrop Grumman. My uncle designed the lunar module, put the first man on the moon. And they confuse these things that are, quote, flying saucers that are man-made, that have rivets and seams, with the actual interstellar vehicles, which are really amazing. And they can fully materialize in 3D space-time, but often they can be hovering in your field and just appear as a sphere or an energy field or a vibratory distortion in the atmosphere. And one of the things I try to teach people is to just have discernment between what it is that classified programs have and what it is that are interstellar and how they overlap and what the distinction is. But the big distinction is understanding that if they are interstellar and they're here, a priori, and by definition, they must be transdimensional or interdimensional. They have to drop out of linear 3D space or 4D space-time and reappear at another point in space-time using very high voltage systems, which we understand. And I know people who've done stuff for various 3-letter agencies who've reproduced this effect. And they basically teleport the entire craft and everyone on it from point A to B. But the other thing people have to understand, they can be in our atmosphere or hovering over you and not in 3D space-time, but in an energy form that is very, very close to what you experience when you're having a lucid flying dream or an out-of-body experience in the so-called astral body. Why? Because it has shifted beyond the crossing point or the speed of light into these other dimensions. And so there is absolutely no way to understand the actual extraterrestrial interstellar presence without understanding the book of our own souls and the nature of our own consciousness. And that, to me, is what is most exciting about this whole subject, is that it opens a vector into not only discovering outer space, but more importantly, inner space. And the two come together on this subject in a really elegant way if you understand it.
Yeah, and the remote viewing that you work with in your expeditions too, is that part of all of that? I mean, I feel it is very strongly, but for other people who may not have ever worked with you or understand now the remote viewing aspect, do you feel that that's really the key to being able to access those willingly and lucidly?
The real key is understanding the nature of consciousness and mind. And as Erwin Schrödinger said, the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, mind is a singularity. And this has now actually been proven in various studies by scientists, including the Peer Lab that Dr. John ran at Princeton, and I knew Dr. John. And what you find if you look into this subject with any depth is that it has been known for a long time that consciousness, even though we identify it with our ego and individuality, there's an aspect of it that is, shall we call, transpersonal, that's transcendental, that is omnipresent. And if you can go into a quiet meditative state, which is what I teach people to do, you can open up into this aspect of mind that is omnipresent. It's everywhere, which means that you can see what's going on the dark side of the moon, if you wish, or if you want to see something going on into the future or the past, knowing, of course, that if you're looking into the future, it's a probable future, not a definite future, because everything we do and say in the now alters the unfolding of the future. And so this is why you have to be careful with that. But when you're remote viewing a distant place, you can do that. So you can contact ET civilizations through this faculty. And then what we do after we remote view is really 3 steps. First, you go into deep meditation. Then you open into this aspect of consciousness that's, quote, non-local, as Dr. Larry Dossey described it, non-local mind. And at that point, it's a discipline to very subtly intend to know or see something that may be at a remote distance or hidden beyond the speed of light. And then once you see it, if it's an extraterrestrial spacecraft or planet or person, the next step, and this is the third and critical one, is to then vector or send an image of exactly where you are. So you send a sort of holographic visual image of where you are. Say you're sitting in upstate New York with your friends there, Marilyn and Diane and all, and you show them where you are coming in from space or wherever you feel they are, and vector them as you would a jet into JFK Airport, but you vector them straight in. And the reason our teams have had so much success with amazing contact and sightings and events is because all interstellar civilizations have not only consciousness developed to pick this up, but also very advanced electromagnetic technologies that interface with what I call coherent thought, this kind of clear thought coming from non-locality. Because it's sort of like coherent light. A laser is coherent light where all the wavelengths, the green wavelength, it's all synced up, and that's why you have a green laser. This is thought linked up into this coherent field of consciousness and this field of unbounded mind. And for people to, the reason I like taking people out for these week-long expeditions is that they have these big breakthroughs over the course of the week with this, if they practice it. And then events begin to happen all around us that are quite unusual. And many people are surprised because there'll be stranger things than if the mothership landed and you could kick the tires on it, because 99.9% of the time, the actual extraterrestrial vehicles are not going to be in 3D. When they are, it's quite spectacular, but often they'll be there in forms that are more like a plasma energy, a field of energy, an electromagnetic signal, a standing wave tone that's almost like a crystalline sound that emerges in the forest all around us out of anomalous sources, which we know are ET. All kinds of phenomena that most people are not expecting. And I think the reason they're not expecting it is that they're living in, they're locked into 3D understanding, but you cannot go from one star system to another locked into a 3D paradigm. You have to go into 5D and 6D and 10D and 12D, and a much higher dimensional understanding of not just what consciousness and mind is, but also the physics of it, the science. And there is a science to this, by the way. And I think this is the really exciting part to me, is that once we can bring out these new energy technologies, just so we're off of the grid and fossil fuels, the next step will be the anti-gravity systems. And then the next step past that will be the systems that deal with trans-dimensional communication that is reproducible and there is a definite science and physics behind it. But it kind of blows people's minds if I talk about it too much. But it's exciting. But in the real world, you can just practice it, because the nice thing about it is that everything you need to make contact and understand this is folded within every person. And it reminds me of the old Sufi saying, it's a rhetorical question that says, thinkest thyself a puny form when within the universe is folded. Literally, the entirety of the universe is folded within every single individual because of the nature of the quantum hologram of consciousness. And when you begin to understand that, not just intellectually, but begin to experience it and explore it, it's amazing what opens up.
You know, as you're talking and you're describing this so beautifully, it brings to mind something that, you know, I work with the Native Americans, and one of the things that I've been privy to, which has been a powerful experience for me on so many levels, is the prophecies that they discuss about the fifth world time that we're in now, and how the human body itself will become the time travel technology through consciousness, and that's part of the prophecies that they work with. Now, when they talk about star beings, and they go way back, much further beyond Roswell and all of the traditional things that so many people hear about in the subculture itself. You know, they talk about it, they have these stories, they have the myths. To them, they've just been here forever. They're still here. They're still coming. And I'm just curious how the indigenous, the Native American aspect has worked for you in your work, and how you know, if at all, if it's somehow integrated into how you do this.
Well, it's integrated because it's part of who I am. My father was half Cherokee. And, of course, the pejorative for that in the South where I grew up was a half-breed, and we had to keep it very secret because of racism. Of course, what was even worse is that I had a black girlfriend in high school. Boy, if my grandmother had found that out, I would have been disowned. But, I mean, well, this is in the 70s in North Carolina. So, you know, my life has not been ordinary, I guess, in many ways, and that's one of them. But my instincts has always, even though I didn't have a direct connection, because my father had no connection to his mother's side of the family, most of whom had died, who were from the Cherokee, on the Trail of Tears that had survived the march out from North Carolina to Oklahoma, as you know. But it was in my sensibility, and if I can use that word, it was in my soul. And so there's the Gaelic and Celtic part of me, and then there's this Native American part. And so the way that I actually found spirit was through nature. I will honestly say that my most profound experiences as a young man and a boy was being out in pure nature, in the wilderness, and having this experience and this deep love for Mother Earth, and I felt it was a conscious being, and there was something transcendent and beautiful, and that is very Native American. But it was something, while I wasn't tutored intellectually, and I wasn't part of any tribe, it was very much awake in my genome for some reason. It was present, and it makes you wonder what's carried on that spiraling helix of DNA, because this was something that certainly I didn't get it directly from either of my parents, who were very humanistic, reductionist, atheistic, et cetera, and so on people. But it was there, and I sensed it at a very young age. And so I was kind of this nature boy that was absolutely enthralled and in love with the spirit of nature and earth and sky and stars from my youngest memories, actually, my very youngest memories.
Well, when I was looking up on some stuff online, I had noticed in Wikipedia that it had mentioned that one of your first ET experiences was around when you were 8 years old. Is that correct?
Yes, I was about 8 or 9, and I was actually out with some boys in the neighborhood, being the little urchins that we were. And it was a crystal clear sky, and I looked up, and there was this seamless, spherical disk that was hovering in the sky, and we all saw it. And I guess I was about 8 or 9, so this would have been probably 1963 or 64, where most of your listeners were born. And it was fascinating. And, you know, for me, you know, I knew immediately what it was. I felt immediately this connection to the occupants. And after that, I started having a series of really lucid dreams with the beings. And, of course, I didn't understand it. I thought it was I was a little freaked out. But you know, it became quite clear to me that we're never alone, and we've never been alone. And of course, my parents just said, "Oh well, you know, you didn't see, you just saw an airplane." Of course, it wasn't. It was silent. It was hovering. It was there, and then it dematerialized in a crystal clear sky, and that ignited an interest inside me. And so I became, I hate to use the word obsessed, but I used to clandestinely collect every magazine and book I could about UFOs back in the 60s and hid them in the bottom of my closet. And I had a 3-foot stack high, I don't think I've ever told this story, of them. And I would pull them out, and I was in such love with the images and the concepts. And, of course, I mean, I sort of outgrew that as my teenage years went on, and then I went into medicine. But I never outgrew the love of it. It just sort of, my obsession with it as a child. I was just absolutely fascinated with it. And so I knew that we weren't alone, and it was something that I knew starting at about age 8.
Interesting. I had the same exact experience, very similar when I was 5. And I've talked about that before. My listeners have heard that story before, but it's interesting. The teenage years, when you grew up, how did that? I know you said you kind of just grew out of it a little bit through that time frame. When you came back into it, that was your near-death experience? Yeah.
Yeah. After that happened, about 6 months later, I was up on a mountain in North Carolina, and I was meditating at sunset. And just before I was going into meditation, I saw the same spacecraft that I saw when I was 8 in the sky, a clear sky. It was in October of 1973. And I just acknowledged them and said, oh, they're back. And so I went into this deep meditation, and I had a samadhi experience, very much like the near-death experience I had. It was so profound. And when I came out of this meditation, it had been at least an hour, and the stars were out above me, and it was stunning, and the Milky Way. I looked up, and then I realized there was a little ET on my right side that touched me on my right shoulder. And I had a ski jacket on, and I could actually see the jacket indent. I felt it. And at that instant, all of my hair, literally, it was like this electromagnetic charge. It was so amazing. And actually, all my hair stood on end, and that's when I had a lot of hair, unlike now. And so what happened was that there was then this snap in space-time, and I found myself with these beings on a craft, and that's when we co-created the CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind protocols. And to be honest with you, if people say, what did you talk about? I said, no, it wasn't that. It was being together. It was very abstract, very trans-dimensional. But it was for probably 2 or 3 hours. And then when I came back, I had this strange anti-gravity field around me where I could go. It was like you see the moonwalkers where they leap and they sort of float a long way and come back down. It was like that. So coming down off this 5,500-foot mountain at midnight, I thought it was 9 o'clock, but it wasn't. I would make a step, and I would go zing, bing, bing. I thought, oh, this is so cool. It was almost like I was levitating. And by the time I got all the way back down to this little college town up in near Boone, North Carolina, I was kind of back to normal. And the town was deserted, and I thought, oh, my God. The Yom Kippur War was going on. I thought we'd had a thermonuclear war. The town was deserted. And it was actually midnight when I thought it was 9 o'clock at night, and which normally the college town would be very busy. So it was this amazing experience. From that, I began to experiment privately with these remote viewing techniques and meditation, the protocol of vectoring the craft in and using consciousness as the central communication system. And it was something that was the result of this contact experience I had in 1973 up on that mountain. That was very unplanned, I guess, in a sense, on my part. And I've often wondered, I think the thing that attracted these ET beings was that I was experiencing consciousness in a very innocent way. After the near-death experience, when I learned meditation, I remember the first time I sat with my teacher, I had a deep transcendent samadhi experience. He looked over at me afterwards. He says, you transcended, didn't you? And I just said, it was my 18th birthday, and I didn't know any better. And I said, well, isn't that what you're supposed to do? I didn't know any better, that you're supposed to make a big geschrei about it, and it's supposed to be so difficult, and a big drama queen. You have to lay on a bed of
confetti falling from the sky,
a bed of nails for 40 years, and all this crap. And I was just like, oh, okay. And what I tell people is that there's so much baggage associated with that. It's actually incredibly simple. It's just about being aware of the mind itself in its pure form. Very simple. And from there, everything happens. So I think that the ETs were interested that there was this boy that had the interest in the ET issue in UFOs, that had this ability to experience consciousness that way. And I think because of that, I was actually sharing with these ETs what it was like to experience universal mind from the perspective of a human, so that there could be this development of a protocol for contact. And I didn't do anything with it for years, obviously. I didn't form CSETI till 1990, and this event happened in 1973. But in the intervening years, it was always with me in some way or another.
It's interesting because when I first met you, I met you at Mount Shasta in person for the first time. And when I first saw you, I just kept getting pictures of you as a child. I could just see you as a kid, and you just had the greatest, biggest smile on your face. It was really quite the image. And what I hope for people getting this kind of hearing you talk on these experiences and being able to connect with you, as you speak from your heart about these topics, growing up over time. This wasn't just something that you popped up one day and decided, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and do this and make lots of money. And this was something that was part of.
No, I always laugh when people bring that up. I go, oh, yes, I'm going to leave a $550,000 a year as chairman of emergency medicine to do this crazy crap where my IRS returns a couple years ago was like $30,000, and like, are you kidding me? It is a joke. When people bring that up, I just laugh because my wife and I have literally foregone or put something on the order of $7 or $8 million of our own earnings into this, and people think that there's there is no funds to be had, and this is the biggest joke ever. But and people have all their conspiracy theories. Because I had briefed CIA directors and head of Defense Intelligence Agency and met with the Rockefellers, they think that somehow those folks are behind what we're doing. I go, yeah, right. I think not. And we have
you clearly say
we've
in the
really
film.
struggled. We've really struggled, and we've really sacrificed. But it's something that I don't feel like that's not what this is about. Frankly, this isn't about me. And with all due respect, it's not about you. It's about all of us together. It's about what humanity can become and must become if we're going to be around for the next 500,000 years. And, a few weeks before the National Press Club event in 2001, it was a very stressful event. I had serious threats on my life. I had a very senior think tank guy who basically said, we're not going to let you do this, and we're going to take you out. And so I did a retreat up near Joshua Tree National Park with some folks, and we went into a cave that a member of our team knew about. And we went in there, and we were in this deep meditation with about 9 of us inside this dome-shaped cave that had Native American etchings from a shaman on the ceiling of it. And a thought as clear as I'm hearing you speak now said that the vision that must guide the world. And it was this vision of us going from the current state into this whole new era, this new yuga, which is a 500,000-year cycle that we're entering, which, by the way, is a universal cycle, the hallmark of which is universal peace, where humans are going to live on this planet peacefully, not for a short period and then fall back into war, but in an unbroken point of ascendancy from going forward for hundreds of thousands of years, and where humans will become extraterrestrial to other planets. And this was so clear. I could see it as clear as walking around on my farm out here in Virginia today. And I think that was something that was so wonderful because people say, what keeps you going? I said, it's that knowledge, it's that vision that we've had and that many people have had, not just myself, that we are at this tilting point, this change, this emergence of where we've been kind of stuck for a few thousand years to where we must become. And that is not just a world peace, which is, world peace is just says 1890s, I want to vomit. It's got to be universal peace, and the crackpots in the UFO subculture say, oh, well, they're the good ETs and the bad ETs. And yeah, I said, let me tell you, if you've got the ability to travel from one star system to another, if they were fed up with us, they'd take us out in 1 nanosecond, and the Earth would be a pink mist floating through space. In fact, I said that to the head of the Wright-Patterson, where the Roswell remains went. I said, the truth of the matter is that these civilizations, of which there are many, are waiting for us to quit being insane. And
really.
It's funny because in the ER, when people came in really schizophrenic, crazy, you had to commit them to the mental ward, and the criteria was dangerous to yourself or others. And I used to think, God, that really defines the human race right now. We're dangerous to ourselves, and we're dangerous to others. And it's that dynamic that we have to change. And it isn't going to happen through, saying, oh, we're going to go from the Cold War and global terrorism to a threat in outer space, that we're going to have a coalition with the ETs that look like they came from Norway, which are our friends, and anyone else that looks different. We're going to go into a sort of an eschatological end-of-the-world struggle, which would only fulfill the fantasies of the hardliners at Opus Dei. I'm going, come on, folks. I mean, this is nuts. We've got to understand that the time we're in is a time where we have to make a complete break with that kind of thinking. And to do it, we're going to have enlightened people everywhere being the ambassadors to these civilizations, the facilitators of disclosure, and the people who support bringing these technologies out so that we're not destroying Gaia and keeping most of the world impoverished and unnecessarily. And there's the old saying, without the justice, there can be no peace. And so long as you have half the world impoverished and you have a petro-fascist system that is destroying the biosphere, while 48% of the population of Earth doesn't even have plumbing, literally a pot to pee in, this is not a sustainable dynamic. And the way to change that is to bring out the science and technology part of this issue, which has been the central motivating purpose of the secrecy for over 60 years. And I think that's what most people don't understand, is that, one of the things that Lawrence Rockefeller did say to me, he said, well, no aspect of life on Earth will be unchanged by the disclosure of this. And I said, yes, Lawrence, that's why it's secret.
Speaking of Rockefeller, Stephen, I just want you to, use this moment to kind of, address the audience and just, because I think what happens, especially in the alternative truth movement, the media, is people hear that name Rockefeller and they just kind of attach a bunch of negative associations to it for whatever reason. And so when they hear you say, and you do even say it in the film that, you did meet with him, do you think that there's a misconstrued idea about what your relationship is with him because of that?
Oh, well, I mean, people misconstrue everything, frankly, well, I won't say what I think about that. Here's what really happened. I was in the process of putting together what was called Project Starlight, which the Clinton Library has released those documents now to brief the president, the CIA director, and stuff. Lawrence Rockefeller, who had an interest of this for years, and he was the philosopher king of the family. It was his brother David doing Chase Manhattan Bank, who's part of this majestic group keeping the secret. Lawrence was not part of that, and he actually wanted to end the secrecy. He was very supportive, but unfortunately, he got painted with the same brush of all the Rockefellers, which of course were Standard Oil, that became ExxonMobil, blah, 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 blah. So I'm not saying there's no culpability in that clan, but Lawrence was, towards the end of his life, I can't speak to when he was younger, but when I knew him, was really concerned about this, and he knew we were in trouble. So I was invited to New York and then to his ranch out in Wyoming to basically brief him and to share with him what we were doing. And so he was very supportive. And, some people called it the Rockefeller Initiative. Well, it wasn't. It was the Disclosure Initiative called Project Starlight back in the 90s that Rockefeller became aware of and became very interested in and was really encouraging President Clinton to end the secrecy on this. Now, I will tell you something I haven't said before. When I was with him privately, he said, I can only do so much with this. I need some people to do it because it's too dangerous for me. And I said, Lawrence, you're old, you're rich, and you're Rockefeller. I'm just a country doctor in North Carolina rambling around in an ER taking care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and heart attacks and stuff. And he said, no, I can't. He says, there are some members of my family, he didn't name them, already jumping up and down on my feet because I'm doing this much. So he, as they say, blood is thicker than water. He was under a lot of pressure not to do too much. On the other hand, he really wanted someone to help do this. And this is the same line I got from a good friend of Bill Clinton's who came to my home after we provided all this material. He said, they're very supportive of what you're recommending, but they're convinced that if the president does this, he will end up like Jack Kennedy. And I started laughing. We were at dinner with my children, and I thought this was the silliest thing I ever heard of. And he stopped me, and he says, "No, they're serious. They really don't." I said, "Well, what am I, chopped liver?" And later we had a private conversation, and he said, "Yes, you're the expendable one. No one cares if they take you out." But they don't want to risk the presidency. And so Clinton said this sort of the same thing that Rockefeller said, and that is, there's a lot of heat on this subject. There are a lot of powerful interests that wants to keep it secret. We don't want to stick our necks out too far ahead of the curve, but if you'll do it, that'd be great. So I tell people the only currency that really matters in all of this is your vision and your heart and your courage. You have to have a certain intellect to deal with the complexity of the issues, but the main thing are those things, and it's a very spiritual issue. And I think the thing, coming back to this near-death experience, because after that I realized there was no death. And so when a former head of Army intelligence threatened me back in the day, I just turned to him and I said, "I'm not afraid of death, so you can go pound salt in someone else's sandbox." And he just looked at me. And then he later came around and offered me and then my wife $2 billion access to a fund if I would shut up and deal with this issue. I said, "No, I'm not interested in your money." I said, "I'm not rich, but I'm well off enough as a physician. I don't care about that." And they made every run at me you can imagine. Threats, bribes, this, that. And, of course, now the Internet's full of all kinds of defaming, nonsensical things. And you just expect that. I mean, I'm at the point now where it's not that I'm so thick-skinned and it doesn't sting. It's just that you expect it, and it's been going on for 20 years, so why shouldn't it go on for 20 more? But the reality is you can't let those things affect what you're going to do if you know the truth about something like this, because this is the pearl of great price. You don't return this one. This is about the human future and our future as a civilization and how we go forward as a people peacefully into space, but also how we live on the earth in peace with Gaia, so we're not harming her, and with justice for the people of the earth, so we're not in poverty. All those issues come in around this subject, so it's so much more than, are UFOs real and are ETs here. It's all these issues, and I think that once you understand what this is about, then you're going to go the distance on it, and that's what I chose to do. I mean, to my own personal detriment, frankly, but I would have been much better, and I think my children, if you ask them, would be much happier if I just stayed a physician and live in a, quote, normal life. But
I don't think that's possible. Now.
Well, I tell people normalcy is greatly overrated. I mean,
yes, it is.
I gave up on that in sixth grade. Yeah. I said, how boring. One time someone said, "Oh, Dr. Greer, you seem so normal." I said, "Well, I've never been so insulted in my life." Anyway, I'm just joking.
Sort of, right?
Sort of.
Well, Stephen, do you think that the fear of death is part of what the current paradigm on this planet uses to keep people's consciousness suppressed? Because no matter how I look at this topic, it always comes back to consciousness, and it always
Absolutely.
comes back to the level of consciousness you're able to hold as a generator of frequency. I really believe that consciousness is a frequency that you generate. So when you are in fear, you're generating fear, and it's a frequency that goes out all around you, just like when you're in love. I mean, everybody knows what it's like to be in love, mostly. And when you're in love with somebody, that frequency just generates at powerful levels, and it's a level of consciousness. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are, because when you talk about death, there's, the masses, the majority of people are very caught in this kind of net that keeps them in that fear of death, so that they just kind of are like hamsters in hamster wheels. They just keep going round and round and round and don't even realize they're in a cage, let alone what's outside of the cage.
Yeah, but I view that as a spiritual disease, and not so much, I think there's a distinction between spirituality and religiosity, which are mostly inversely proportional. But that's Greer's theorem, by the way. There's an inverse relationship between religiosity and spirituality. But I think that if you understand the nature of consciousness and mind and conscious evolution and higher states of consciousness, you can experience that without a near-death experience, frankly, and begin to realize that we are more than just a reductionist, a bunch of 100 billion neurons firing, that we are this amazing mind and consciousness that is, our individualities are an opening that is tied into and integrated all the time into that omnipresent great self, if you will, and the great spirit, as the native people call it. And that is just the truth. And once you experience that, then you begin to have a more balanced approach to something that may be a threat. It isn't that I haven't been afraid at times, and it isn't that I'm reckless, but there's a difference between foolishness and bravery and courage. And I think that, you begin to understand that, there's a time for you to do certain things and to lean into certain things. And wisdom comes with that. And I've not always been wise. I've had plenty of foolish moments in my life. But,
I think we can all relate to that.
Oh yeah, and
human,
I actually delight in it. I'm actually I'm a wild man. Anyone who really knows me, it's like, oh boy, is this guy wild? I'm wilder than any of my children. So, but much wilder. But the fact is that I'm sort of unrestrained. But the thing is that we have this ability to experience this state of awareness every day, all the time, and it's just a matter of intending to do that. And there are techniques that facilitate it, and that's what various meditative and prayer states will facilitate that. And once you experience that, then you're not going to just be in your physical body self where there is this fight or flight response in the midbrain that causes you to become so fearful. And that's where you find true spiritual courage and what's been called the Shambhala warrior. Not in a violent way, but the courage to go move, to do the right thing. And I have to say, I have a home in Washington, and I meet with people all the time who are enormously powerful and frankly also enormously wealthy. And they are so afraid of taking on this issue because of fear of ridicule, for fear of reprisal, for fear of loss of their career, for fear. It's all based on fear. And so fear is the mind killer, and fear is the opposite of love. And I think that once you experience a deeper state of yourself that is this conscious, transcendent reality, which is within every single person, like a quantum hologram that's omnipresent, then you can begin to free yourself of that trap, and it's a process. And I think that's what spiritual development does result in if it's genuine.
Do you feel that if one of us breaks through, we all break through because we're all ultimately one mind?
Well, I think it has an effect, and this has been documented scientifically, that when a group of people experience that, it will affect the entire community and area. And so I think that the concepts that Rupert Sheldrake began to discuss in morphogenic fields, and he and I've lectured at some of the same conferences, the Science of Consciousness Conference and others, what we find is that if you look at studies, that when a certain experience begins to be manifest by a certain number of people, it non-locally begins to be experienced by people that aren't in any direct connection. It's like the 100th monkey effect. And this has been documented scientifically. So I think that, yes, it does, but not maybe as strongly. But it's like anyone who's been with someone who's a very powerful, conscious person. There is a certain, well, in the East they call it a darshan, sort of an effect that you can feel from that person.
Oh, yeah. And I just recently had the opportunity to meet the Dalai Lama while he was here in the States. And he's a perfect example of just what you just described. The fact that his mere presence can change people in the sense that he resonates this frequency that is profound and lifts and clears and just connects you to something that's very, very powerful. Right. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to make sure that we close with giving. I know it's gone by so fast. We give everybody a chance to know where they can connect with you. What's your next training? I know everything's on your website, but if you want to just give a few seconds of what's next for if people want to decide to come up with you.
Everything we're doing is now integrated at SiriusDisclosure.com. That's SIRIUS, like the star system, disclosure.com. And we are going to be going to the United Kingdom in the crop circles for a week in July, although that's already oversubscribed in full. But we'll be doing another event in the western United States. We haven't quite selected where. We were thinking Mount Shasta, but I think we're going to find a place that's more private, that we're going to all be at a retreat center surrounded by national forests. It's exciting, but we're just nailing that down. But information about that will be up on our website soon. And everyone who wants to see the film, Sirius, can see it now on our website at SiriusDisclosure.com. You can see it video on demand, and you can also order the DVD. We're going to start manufacturing those actually next week, and hopefully they'll start shipping out mid-June. So anyone who wants the DVD can do that. And also, if you want to see it on the big screen, because I think it's much more impactful if you can, it will be at the Quad Cinema in New York, May 31st through June 6th, and then also there in Beverly Hills at the Music Hall 3. And information about that is at Laemmle, LAEMMLE.com. So that's sort of what's happening. And the main thing that I'm asking people to help us with is to contribute to the STAR New Energy Fund, Sirius Technology and Research. We have an entity to raise the funds to open a research and development lab to bring these amazing new technologies out so we can get off oil and gas and coal. And you can contribute and donate any amount at SiriusDisclosure.com. And any of the proceeds from the film rental or purchase also goes to supporting that effort. So anything that any of you can do to do that would be great. And in June, we're going to start a program where people can get the DVD and then host Star Energy Lab screenings, fundraisers, where you can do it in your home or your Unity Church or your community center. So we're going to start that as well, so people can stay tuned. And anyone who wants to can sign up on our website and with your email address, and we'll send you our newsletter with all this information as it begins to break.
Excellent. And there's so much more, too. You do a radio show and all of that information, and your blog, and you're on Twitter. So there's so many ways people can connect with you, and they can also find out the local Sea City groups if they're interested as well. Stephen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for your interest and your support. I really appreciate it, Hillary.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for participating. All of the links that Stephen mentioned are posted on my website. They're on my Facebook page. They're also going to be updated and listed as well on my Achieve Radio homepage right here. And until next time, everyone, namaste. Good night.